This story begins the moment a man realizes he is rich in everything, except time. In an old Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, where narrow cobblestone alleys twist like ancient thoughts, there lived a merchant known simply as Eliav. People whispered about him the way you whisper about a legend half awe, half warning. He owned 3 shops, 2 warehouses, and enough gold to buy every home on his street. But Eliav had a curse. He never had a single minute to enjoy any of it. One morning, a young boy watched the merchant rush across the market square, breathless, carrying a stack of ledgers so high it covered half his face. The boy called out, "Master Eliav, why do you run as though someone is chasing you?" Without stopping, the merchant shouted back, "Because someone is everything I have not finished." The boy laughed, but an elderly rabbi standing nearby did not. He whispered, "A man who is chased by his own life is not a rich man. He is merely a tired one." And so the story travelled through the marketplace, the tale of the wealthy merchant who owned everything except peace. You've probably met someone like him before. Maybe you've been him before. Years later, far from Jerusalem, in a bright modern city of glass and steel, another man was living a strangely similar life. His name was Daniel. Daniel had done everything society told him to do. He graduated from a respected university. He got a decent job in a competitive European tech firm. He bought the latest phone, the newest headphones, the stylish clothes. He filled his apartment with objects that were supposed to represent success. A smart lamp that changed colours, a coffee machine with 12 pointless settings, and a couch that everyone said was iconic on Instagram. But Daniel was exhausted, always behind, always stressed, always feeling like the day had already ended before he even had a chance to start it. He would wake up, rush to work, rush home, rush to clean, rush to email, rush to cook, and then fall asleep, scrolling through more things he felt he needed to buy. Things that made him feel momentarily full, but never whole. One night, after another 13-hour day, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed. Everything around him looked expensive, but the one thing he truly wanted, stillness, was nowhere to be found. The story shifts the night Daniel receives an email from his cousin, a scholar living in Tel Aviv. The message was simple, containing only one question. If time is the only thing you can never earn back, why do you treat it like it's cheap? The words hit him harder than any motivational speech ever could. He closed his laptop and stared at his hands. Hands that were always typing, always cleaning, always rushing, never creating, never resting, never choosing. It felt as if someone had placed a mirror in front of his life, and suddenly the reflection didn't look like success. It looked like speed without direction. The next morning, Daniel called his cousin. "What did you mean by that question?" he asked. His cousin chuckled, the gentle, almost mischievous laugh so common among old Jewish storytellers. "Let me tell you a parable," he said. "It is about a man who spent his whole life saving money, yet went bankrupt the day he needed time. The parable went like this. A man sought to become the richest person in his village. Every day he saved coins, worked longer, slept less. His neighbours admired his discipline, his ambition, his never-ending hunger for more. But one winter, his daughter fell gravely ill. The doctor told him, 'She needs time with you, not medicine, not money, time.' The man opened his treasure chest proudly and asked, 'How much time can I buy with this?' The doctor sighed. 'All the gold in the world cannot buy one more hour.' The man felt the weight of his wealth collapse into dust, and the parable ends with a line the Jews repeat often. You think you're buying things, but things are buying you. Daniel sat silently on the phone, the truth hitting him like cold wind. For years he had been buying the wrong things. Objects stole his time, distractions stole his energy, and expectation stole his peace. He suddenly understood Eliav, the ancient merchant from the old market. He understood why the rabbi said a man chased by his own life is not rich, simply tired. Because Daniel was tired too, bone tired, soul tired, tired in a way no vacation or new gadget could fix. His cousin's voice softened. Daniel, wealth is not measured by what you own. It is measured by what you can afford to walk away from. And the only way to walk away from anything is to buy back your time. The words lingered. Something inside him shifted quiet, subtle but real. The beginning of a new mindset, the beginning of a new story. A story about buying back his life. Daniel spent the next week moving through life as if someone had quietly rearranged the furniture in his mind. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. He still went to work, still answered emails, still kept up with deadlines, but a question kept echoing inside him like a persistent whisper. If time is the only thing you can never earn back, why do you treat it like it's cheap? He heard it on the train. He heard it while brushing his teeth. He heard it even in moments that used to numb him like scrolling through online stores late at night, convincing himself he needed one more comfort item to survive tomorrow. One evening he met his old college friend Lucas at a cafe near the river. Lucas arrived with the sharp scent of cologne and the frantic energy of a man wrestling the world. His shoes were expensive, his watch gleamed like a tiny sun, and his phone buzzed non-stop with notifications he couldn't ignore. He apologized for being late, but never once put the phone down. As they spoke, Daniel noticed something that felt unsettling. No matter how polished Lucas looked, his eyes told the truth. There was a fatigue there, a deep, bone-level weariness that no luxury could hide. It was the same emptiness Daniel had seen in the mirror so many times. "You seem tired," Daniel said gently. Lucas forced a grin. "That's the price of success, man." But in his voice, Daniel didn't hear pride. He heard surrender. Daniel wanted to explain the thought growing inside him, but the words felt fragile, half-formed. Still he tried. "I don't think being tired is success." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Then what is?" Daniel searched for an answer. Maybe success is having time to breathe, time to think, time to live." Lucas laughed, not mockingly, but desperately. "I'd love that, but who has time for that?" The conversation stayed with Daniel long after they parted ways. He walked home slowly, feeling the cold air pinch his cheeks. Around him the city pulsed with artificial brightness, neon signs, glowing windows, headlights slicing through the fog. But all he could think was how many people were living inside that brightness, while carrying a darkness no one talked about. His cousin's words returned. Most people are not time poor because life is hard. They are time poor because their priorities are. The sentence sank into him, like a stone falling into deep water. The next day, Daniel flew to Tel Aviv for a short work trip. His cousin invited him to visit a small courtyard behind an old synagogue. When Daniel arrived, he found an elderly rabbi sitting at a wooden bench, sunlight resting gently on his shoulders, like a blessing. The rabbi looked at Daniel as if he had been expecting him for years. "I hear," the rabbi said softly, "that you are looking for time." Daniel blinked. I think so." The rabbi smiled, the kind of smile that held centuries of patience. "Tell me," he asked, "what is the heaviest thing a person can carry?" Daniel hesitated. "Responsibility? Regret?" "No," the rabbi said. "The heaviest thing is an unlived life." Something inside Daniel tightened. "You young men in the West," the rabbi continued, "you buy so many objects to fill the silence. But fullness does not come from what you consume, it comes from what you create. And you cannot create anything if you are always too busy surviving your own schedule." Daniel lowered his eyes. The truth stung because it was so accurate. The rabbi leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you work to earn money, but really, you work to buy back the hours you burned getting the money. A strange cycle, no? Daniel felt exposed, like someone had opened him up and rearranged all the parts. "Stop asking how much something costs," the rabbi said. "Ask how much time it costs. Because time is the only currency that does not regenerate." Those words carved themselves into Daniel's consciousness. They didn't feel like advice, they felt like prophecy. Later, Daniel wandered through the streets, the air warm, the city buzzing with life. He passed families laughing, street vendors bargaining, musicians playing violins beneath old stone archways. For the first time he didn't rush, he simply walked, slowly, intentionally, as if he finally understood that the world didn't get smaller when he slowed down. It actually opened. He realized he wasn't poor in money, he was poor in time, poor in clarity, poor in the ability to choose his own life. The illusion of wealth had been shattered. All those objects he bought were not symbols of success, they were substitutes for meaning. They were comfort for a life that had no space to breathe. When he finally reached his hotel, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, the same place where his awakening began weeks ago. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The air tasted different, lighter, almost new. He didn't have a solution yet. He didn't have a plan yet. But he had something he had been missing for years. Awareness. And awareness is where transformation always begins. For the first time in a very long time, Daniel whispered a question, not out of fear, but out of possibility. What would my life look like if I stopped chasing things and started buying time? A quiet shift began inside him. Not dramatic, not loud, but unmistakable. The beginning of change, the beginning of choice, the beginning of a mind awakening to a different kind of wealth. For a while, nothing changed on the outside. Daniel still had the same job, the same apartment, the same responsibilities, but inside something had shifted. He could no longer lie to himself. He started noticing every small way in which his time was being drained. He saw it in the pile of laundry that stole an hour each Saturday, in the constant grocery runs, in the endless emails he answered that didn't move his life forward even 1 inch, in the way he said yes to everything because saying no felt selfish. He began to see his days like a bank statement, every task, every obligation, every distraction, another transaction, another withdrawal of his most precious currency. The numbers didn't look good. One evening, back in his city, Daniel sat at his desk long after midnight, hunched over a spreadsheet for work. His apartment was a mess, dishes in the sink, clothes draped over a chair, grocery bags still on the floor. His eyes were burning. Somewhere in his inbox, unread, was a message from a friend of a friend, an investor, looking for early-stage founders to back. A week ago, that email would have ignited him. Tonight, he didn't even click it. "I'll look at it tomorrow," he muttered. But tomorrow came with new demands, new fires, new noise. He forgot. Days later, Daniel finally opened the message. His throat tightened as he read the words. "Hey Daniel, I was in your city this week and had a free window to meet potential founders. I'm now flying back, and my schedule is packed for the next months. If we don't talk now, it'll have to be next year. All the best." The date on the email was 3 days ago. His chest sank. It wasn't just a missed meeting. It felt like a mirror held up to his life. He hadn't missed the opportunity because he was lazy. He'd missed it because he was buried under tasks that didn't require his mind, buried under obligations that didn't require his soul, buried under things that could have been done by anyone, but somehow always ended up on his plate. A quiet anger rose in him, not at the investor, not at his job, at himself. He grabbed his phone and called his cousin in Tel Aviv. "I missed something important," Daniel said, his voice tight. "Good?" "Hey," his cousin replied calmly. "Now you're ready." "Ready for what?" Daniel snapped. "For the next question." There was a pause, then his cousin spoke with that deliberate, patient cadence he'd inherited from his teachers. "Tell me, Daniel, how much of your life is spent doing things that someone else could do for you?" Daniel thought about cleaning, grocery shopping, sorting receipts, scheduling deliveries, fixing small things around the apartment, chasing customer support for things he barely cared about. "Too much," he whispered. "Yes," his cousin said. You are a man using a Stradivarius violin to hammer nails. Before Daniel could respond, his cousin continued, I want you to talk to the rabbi again. He has a story for you. 2 days later, on a video call, the rabbi appeared on his screen. The old man's face was calm, illuminated by the gentle light of late afternoon. I heard you lost an opportunity, the rabbi said. Mazel tov. Daniel frowned. That's not good news. Oh, it is, the rabbi insisted. Pain is only useful when it teaches. Today, your pain is a teacher, so now you can listen. Daniel exhaled. I'm listening. There was once a king, the rabbi began, who lived in a grand palace filled with treasures from every land. He had gold from the east, silk from the south, spices from the west, and marble from the north. The king loved his wealth. He walked through his halls every day, counting his possessions, making sure everything was in its perfect place. One day, a servant ran into the throne room shouting, My king, the outer wing of the palace is on fire. Daniel leaned closer. The king waved his hand impatiently. I am busy counting my coins. Come back when I'm finished. Minutes passed. The servant returned, more frantic. My king, the fire is spreading to the inner chambers. Again the king brushed him off. Not now. Can't you see I am organizing my tapestries? They must be arranged by color. The third time, the servant fell to his knees. My king, your chambers are burning. Your bed, your books, your memories, everything you truly love will be gone. This time the king stood up and saw smoke already seeping under the door. The rabbi's voice grew soft. He had spent all his time guarding symbols of wealth, while ignoring the very structure that held his life together. By the time he looked up from his inventory, his palace was already ash. Daniel swallowed. So I'm the king. Of course, the rabbi replied. You are busy counting coin smells, tasks, small obligations while your palace burns. Your time, your mind, your chance to build something bigger. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. But what am I supposed to do? I can't just stop doing things. Life doesn't run on its own. The rabbi's eyes twinkled, a mix of warmth and mischief. Who told you that you must be the one doing everything? There was a silence, a heavy, uncomfortable, necessary silence. You still think like a poor man, the rabbi continued, not unkindly. A poor man believes he must trade his own time for every problem. A wealth-minded person understands they can trade money for time. And the wise, he paused, letting the word hang. The wise trade money for time and time for creation. You must learn to buy back your own life. Daniel shook his head slowly. You mean hire people? Like an assistant, a cleaner? The rabbi smiled. You see, you understand. You're simply afraid. I don't know if I can afford that, Daniel said. The rabbi raised an eyebrow. You can't afford not to. How much did it cost you to miss that investor? How many hours of scrubbing floors equal 1 hour of thinking, planning, building something that could change your future? The question cut deep. Start small, the rabbi said. Outsource one thing. Just one. Feel what it is like when a piece of your life no longer depends on your time. That night, Daniel sat at his laptop staring at a blank search bar. Hire cleaning service near me. Virtual assistant part-time. His fingers hovered over the keys. It felt strange. Guilty, almost. Like he was cheating. He'd been raised to believe that doing everything yourself was noble. That suffering personally for every task made you hard-working, responsible, respectable. But what if that belief was the very thing keeping him small? He imagined an extra 3 hours a week where he wasn't cleaning, shopping, sorting, fixing. 3 hours that could be used to learn, to strategize, to build the product idea he'd been postponing for years, to simply think. He booked a cleaning service for the first time in his life. He hired a part-time virtual assistant to handle scheduling and admin tasks. The first week felt uncomfortable. He kept checking on the cleaner, responding to emails his assistant had already answered. trying to stay in control, like a man who had hired help but still insisted on carrying half the load. Then something subtle happened. One evening he came home to a clean apartment, an organised inbox, a list of appointments already arranged for the week. No dishes, no trash bags, no chaos. For the first time in months, he sat down at his desk, and there was nothing urgent to react to. Only a blank page. Time. Space. He opened a notebook and, almost shyly, wrote at the top of a fresh page, "What do I want to build?" The pen hesitated. Then it moved. An hour passed, then 2. He didn't notice. He was somewhere else now, inside possibilities, ideas, long-term thinking. As he closed the notebook, a strange feeling washed over him. It wasn't excitement, though that was there. It wasn't fear, though that lingered too. It was something deeper. He had just experienced for the first time what it felt like to buy back a piece of his own life. And he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Daniel woke up to an unfamiliar feeling. Silence. No urgent messages screaming for his attention. No mental checklist of chores waiting to ambush him the moment his feet touched the floor. His apartment was already clean. His week was already scheduled. His inbox already filtered. For the first time, his mind wasn't on fire the second he opened his eyes. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and a strange thought arrived. So this is what it feels like, to have room to think. He made coffee, not in a rush, not as a survival mechanism, but as a small ritual. Then he sat at his desk, pulled out the notebook he'd started the night before, and reread the words at the top of the page. What do I want to build? It wasn't just a question about work or business. It was a question about life, about identity, about who he wanted to become, now that he had tasted a drop of time that wasn't already spoken for. His old mindset felt like an ill-fitting suit, heavy, tight, outdated. For years he had believed that being good meant carrying everything himself. That struggling alone made him deserving. That exhaustion was proof of effort, and effort was proof of worth. But the moment he traded money for time, something inside him whispered, what if effort was meant to build, not just to endure? Later that day, he called his cousin again. I did it, Daniel said. I hired help. And how do you feel? His cousin asked. Daniel hesitated. Lighter, but also guilty. It feels like I'm cheating at life. His cousin laughed softly. You're not cheating, you're graduating. From what? From the belief that you must be the worker and never the architect. The words settled around him like a cloak. You're starting to think like an investor, his cousin continued. Not just with money, but with hours. That is how our people survive. We are taught that time is not a river you float in. It's a resource you direct. That sentence stayed with him long after the call ended. Over the next few weeks, Daniel experimented with his newfound pockets of time. He started small. He dedicated 1 hour each evening to reading about business models, investing, stories of people who had built something from nothing. Not in a frantic way, not as a desperate grab for shortcuts, but with calm curiosity. He realized how much of his past learning had been shallow scrolling advice threads, saving quotes, skimming articles. This was different. This was deep, focused, intentional. Another hour, twice a week, he reserved for conversations. Not mindless socializing, but real talks with people who were building things, founders, creators, even an older neighbour who had once run his own small shop and now spent his mornings feeding birds in the park. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions more than he offered opinions. For the first time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to understand. In one of those conversations, an older acquaintance said something that shook him. Real wealth is what grows when you're not there. The phrase reminded him of the rabbi. He could almost hear the old man's voice. Real wealth is what grows when you sleep. Until now, nothing in Daniel's life grew when he slept. His salary didn't. His knowledge barely did. His opportunities certainly didn't. Everything depended on him showing up, trading hours for movement. He began to see the difference between consumers and creators. Consumers fill their time with what others have made: shows, products, gossip, trends. Creators use their time to make something that didn't exist before. Ideas, systems, services, art, companies. Consumers ask, what can I buy that will make me feel better tonight? Creators ask, what can I build that will make me freer in 5 years? Daniel realized he had spent most of his adult life as a sophisticated consumer. Now, almost timidly, he was stepping into the role of a beginner creator. Of course, it wasn't smooth. There were days he wanted to fire the cleaner and the assistant and go back to doing it all himself. It would have been easy to say, this is too much. I'm not that important. I don't need help. On those days, his guilt spoke loudest. Who am I to outsource? Who am I to act like my time is valuable? Who am I to think I deserve help? One evening he confessed this to the rabbi on a call. The rabbi listened, smiling faintly. You think this is about deserving, isn't it? Daniel replied. No, the rabbi said. This is about stewardship. Stewardship, yes. Your time, your mind, your gifts, they're not just for you. They are also for what you are meant to create in this world. When you waste them, you are not only robbing yourself, you are robbing the people who could have benefited from what you might have built. Daniel had never thought of it that way. You're not buying help because you're too good for small tasks, the rabbi continued. You are buying help because your highest work is not sweeping floors. Your highest work is thinking, designing, deciding, building. The rabbi paused, then added quietly, a poor mindset asks, how can I spend less? A wealthy mindset asks, how can I make my time worth more? That night, Daniel looked around his apartment, not with guilt, but with a new kind of responsibility. If he was going to buy back his time, he owed that time a purpose. Slowly, he began to direct it. He carved out weekly blocks for deep work on an idea that had lived in his head for years. A simple software product that could help freelancers manage clients without drowning in admin. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was real. It solved a problem he had felt himself. At first, the work was clumsy. He doubted himself with every line of planning, every sketch. But he kept returning to it, session after session, like a craftsman shaping wood. And something unexpected happened. The more he poured his renewed time into creating, the less interest he had in buying unnecessary things. The urge to impulse buy faded. The joy of unboxing something new felt childish compared to the quiet satisfaction of watching an idea become clearer on paper. He discovered a new kind of pleasure, not the rush of acquiring, but the calm of building. His friends noticed the change. You're different lately, Lucas said one day over another coffee. Less chaotic. Did you get a raise or something? Daniel shook his head, smiling. No, I just stopped acting like my time was free. Lucas laughed, not fully understanding, but intrigued. You sound like one of those old wise guys now. Maybe I've been borrowing their thoughts, Daniel said. He thought of the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem he had never visited, of merchants like Eliav, of rabbis who treated questions like sacred doors. He thought of how their people had survived centuries of exile and uncertainty, not just by saving money, but by honouring time, mind, learning, and community. Maybe this was what that mindset felt like from the inside. Not flashy, not loud, but deliberate, focused. Free in a way that had nothing to do with having no obligations, and everything to do with choosing which obligations truly mattered. One evening, as the sun went down behind the buildings, outside his window, Daniel closed his laptop without the familiar knot of anxiety in his chest. His apartment was still tidy, his inbox still under control, his to-do list shorter but sharper. He put on his coat and stepped outside, not to escape his life, but to walk inside it more fully. On the sidewalk, watching the sky fade from a gold to deep blue, he understood something simple and profound. Once, He had spent his days trying to afford more things. Now he was learning to afford more self. It wasn't about becoming rich in the way magazines defined it. It was about becoming rich in choices, in focus, in mental space. The old Daniel had chased objects. The new Daniel was starting to cultivate something else. A life where time was not an afterthought, but the main investment. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet conviction took root. If he kept buying time and feeding it with creation instead of consumption, something in his world would eventually start to grow on its own. Something that might, one day, keep growing, even while he slept. Time did not change everything overnight. Daniel still had bad days. There were mornings when he woke up and his mind reached automatically for the old chaos, like fingers groping for a habit in the dark. There were weeks when his job became heavier, and his product ideas felt clumsy and uncertain, but something had shifted in the structure of his life. He was no longer spending every hour reacting. He was starting to allocate. He had bought back small blocks of time, and he was feeding those blocks with learning, planning, and creating. It didn't look impressive from the outside. No dramatic success story, no viral posts, no sudden wealth. Just a man sitting at his desk regularly, doing deep work, a quiet discipline that nobody applauded. One evening, after a long session refining his software concept, he sent a message to his cousin. "I feel like I'm moving so slowly," he wrote. "Like nothing is happening." His cousin replied almost instantly. "Nothing? Really? You're planting seeds, Daniel. Seeds are not nothing." He added another line a moment later. "Our people have a saying. The tree you sit under today was planted by someone who didn't see its shade." Daniel read the words twice. Then he looked at the notebook on his desk. The lines of sketches and notes that had felt so small moments ago. Maybe they weren't small. Maybe they were just early. Weeks turned into months. His product began to take shape, not as a sudden stroke of genius, but as the slow accumulation of decisions made in protected time. A simple prototype, a test with a few freelancers he knew, feedback that stung, improvements that took longer than he wanted, and as his product slowly matured, something else did too, his relationship with time. He noticed how different his evenings felt now. Before he either numbed himself with distractions or collapsed from exhaustion. Now he experienced a strange calm. There were still responsibilities, there was still effort, but there was less chaos, less noise, fewer pointless errands swallowing his hours. He could feel it. His time was no longer being simply spent. It was being put to work. One afternoon, on a call with the rabbi, Daniel tried to explain this. "It's like, I used to pour my time into a bucket with a hole at the bottom," he said. "No matter how much I worked, it all leaked away. Now, for the first time, some of that time feels stored, like it's building towards something." The rabbi nodded slowly. "Good. You're beginning to understand leverage." "Leverage?" Daniel asked. "Yes. When your time touches only tasks, it disappears. When your time touches systems, it multiplies. 1 hour building a system can save you 10, 20, 100 hours later. That is how the wise turn time into a servant instead of a master." He leaned in, eyes bright. "Let me tell you another story." Daniel smiled. "Of course you will." "There was a silversmith," the rabbi began, "who was known for crafting the purest silver in the region. People came from distant towns to buy from him, because his silver shone with a softness no one else could achieve. When asked about his secret, he said, 'I do not fight the fire, I watch it.' Every night he would melt the silver in a small furnace. As the metal bubbled and boiled, impurities would rise to the surface. He could not rush this. If he turned the fire too high, the silver would burn. Too low, and the impurities would never separate. He simply waited, watching, skimming off the dross as it appeared. 'How do you know when the silver is ready?' a young apprentice asked him once. The silversmith smiled. 'When I can see my reflection clearly.' The rabbi let the story hang in the air. "Your time is your fire, Daniel," he said quietly. "You used to burn everything, your energy, your health, your days in a frantic rush, and your life was full of noise, full of impurities. Now you're beginning to use your time differently. You are watching. You are skimming away tasks that do not require you. You are patient." He paused, then added, "One day your life will show a clearer reflection of who you truly are. That is what happens when you refine how you spend your time." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He realized something simple. His old life had been busy but not refined. All fire, no clarity. Now, even though progress felt slow, it was at least aligned. His hours were finally burning in the right direction. As the prototype of his software improved, he decided to share it with more freelancers in his network. Some liked it, some didn't. A few started using it regularly. Then it happened. One morning, he woke up, checked his email, and saw it, a payment notification. Someone he had never met, from another country, had signed up for a paid plan overnight, and left a short note. "This solves a problem I've had for years. Thank you." Daniel stared at the screen. It wasn't a huge amount of money, not by any reasonable financial standard, but it carried a different kind of weight. It was money earned while he slept. Money that came not from his direct labor, but from something he had built. It was, in a small way, a physical proof of the rabbi's words. Real wealth is what grows when you sleep. He called his cousin. "I just made money in my sleep," Daniel said, almost laughing. "Good," his cousin replied. "That's the correct direction. It's not a lot. It's not about the amount. It's about the structure. A stream has started. Now you either grow it or you ignore it." He didn't ignore it. Daniel continued to refine, improve, and listen. He hired a freelance developer for specific technical parts instead of trying to do everything himself. He brought on a designer to polish the interface, rather than spending nights fumbling with colors alone. Each time he paid someone, the old guilt rose in his chest, and each time he remembered the rabbi's voice. A poor man believes he must trade his own time for every problem. He wasn't rich yet, not by any means. But he was no longer thinking like a man who believed his time was endlessly disposable. Not everyone understood. Some friends rolled their eyes when he mentioned his assistant or his cleaner. "Must be nice," one said, half joking, half bitter. "So you're too good to do your own chores now," another teased. At first their comments pierced him. They poked at the last, fragile pieces of his old identity, the one that equated suffering with virtue. He brought this to the rabbi as well. "They think I've changed," he said, frustrated. "They think I'm lazy or arrogant, because I don't do everything myself anymore." The rabbi listened, then answered with the gentleness of someone walking on sacred ground. "When you rise," he said, "you don't leave people behind. You leave their mindset behind." Daniel was silent. "If you return to your old way of living just so others feel comfortable," the rabbi continued, "you're not being loyal. You're being disloyal to the potential entrusted to you." He let the words sink in. "You may still love them, still meet them, still share laughter, but you do not have to share their beliefs about what your time is worth." That night, Daniel walked alone through the streets of his city. He thought about all the generations. Before him, people scattered, persecuted, rebuilding their lives in foreign lands. The Jewish families who had learned over and over that physical possessions could be taken, but education, mindset, and the wise use of time were portable wealth. Maybe this was why their wisdom had survived. Not because they clung to objects, but because they invested deeply in thought, in learning, in how they used the irreplaceable currency of hours and days. As he walked, he realized that his small product, his assistant, his cleaner, his new routines, these were not just practical choices. They were a declaration that his time was not cheap, that his mind was not a trash bin for every incoming request, that his life was not a palace he would let burn while he counted coins. Back in his apartment, He opened his laptop and checked his dashboard. A few more sign-ups, a few more active users. Nothing dramatic, but real, steady. Growing. He closed the laptop, not out of exhaustion, but out of intention. The work for today was done. The system he had created would keep running without him for a while. Outside, the sky was blushing with the last colours of evening. He poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and watched lights blink on across the city. Somewhere out there, people were still running, still rushing, still convinced that the only way to move forward was to move faster. He had believed that once. Now he knew better. The more wisely he used his time, the more his time worked for him. The more he bought to time and filled it with creation, the more his life began to quietly multiply. It wasn't magic, it was math, it was mindset. It was a long series of small deliberate choices. Time was no longer just something he moved through. It had become a partner, and although he didn't know exactly where this path would lead, he knew one thing with startling clarity. He was finally walking toward a life that could grow even when he stopped moving. It was almost a year later when Daniel finally stepped into the old streets of Jerusalem he had imagined so many times. The alleys were just as he'd pictured them from the rabbi's stories, narrow, uneven stones underfoot, walls that seemed to lean in as if they too were listening to every conversation. The air carried traces of spices, bread, and history. Children ran past him laughing. Old men sat outside small shops, talking with the slow assurance of people who understood that time was not a race but a resource. He walked with no rush. He had arranged his work, his product, his calls, his obligations. The systems he'd built, imperfect but real, were running quietly in the background of his life. For once, he was not escaping anything. He was arriving. He met the rabbi in a small courtyard behind a synagogue, under the shade of an old tree whose roots had woven themselves into the stone over years of patient persistence. "You finally came," the rabbi said, a smile already waiting for him. "Yes," Daniel replied. "I owed this place a visit. It's where my story began, even before I knew it." They sat on a wooden bench. The light fell in gentle patterns across the rabbi's face, softening the lines of age into something like carved wisdom. "So," the rabbi said, "tell me, what have you done with your time?" It wasn't a casual question. It felt like a doorway. Daniel took a breath. He told him about the cleaning service, the assistant, the early discomfort. He spoke of the notebook, the product idea, the slow progress. He described the prototype, the first paying users, the feeling of seeing money arrive while he slept not as magic, but as the harvest of time invested differently. He confessed his guilt, his fear of being judged, his old attachment to the idea that suffering equaled virtue. He recounted the small freedoms he had begun to taste, evenings that weren't devoured by chores, mornings that began in silence instead of panic, conversations that weren't rushed. The rabbi listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, eyes attentive. When Daniel finished, there was a brief silence. "You have begun to live differently," the rabbi said at last. "I don't feel rich," Daniel admitted. "Not in the usual sense," the rabbi chuckled. "Of course not. You are still in the middle. The middle always feels messy." He gestured toward the alley beyond the courtyard. "In this city," he said, "we have seen kingdoms rise and fall, empires come and go. Do you know what survives? Stones?" Daniel guessed. "Stories," the rabbi corrected gently, "and the people who know how to use time." He shifted slightly on the bench, his voice lowering. "Do you remember the merchant Eliav?" Daniel nodded. "The man who was rich in everything, except time." "There is a part of the story I did not tell you," the rabbi said. In the last years of his life, when his legs were slower and his beard was white, Eliav finally understood his curse. He began to sell his businesses, not because they failed, but because he had realized something terrible. He had spent his entire youth buying objects and status, but had never bought a single hour of freedom. He gave away much of his wealth to his children, but one of his grandsons refused the inheritance. The boy asked for something else instead. "Teach me," the grandson said, "not how to make money, but how not to become its slave. The rabbi paused, looking directly at Daniel. That grandson, he said quietly, died with much less gold than Eliaf, but he died with more time that had been truly his. He chose to build his life in a way that did not require him to set himself on fire just to stay warm. Daniel absorbed the story slowly. So Eliaf realized all of this too late? The rabbi tilted his head. Too late for his youth? Yes, but not too late to change his family. He let the words breathe. You are not Eliaf, he added. You are the grandson. You are the one who asked a different question. Daniel looked down at his hands. I still struggle, he said honestly. There are days I want to grab control back, to do everything myself, to prove I'm not weak. There are days I doubt my product, my choices, this whole philosophy. The rabbi smiled, the kind of smile that knows storms, but trusts the sky. Doubt is good, he said. Doubt means you're awake. The question is not whether you doubt. The question is, who is in charge when you do? Your fear or your understanding of time? He leaned back, eyes half closed, as if listening to a memory. You see, my boy, we are taught from young that there are three kinds of people in the world. Those who trade time for money, those who trade money for time, and those who make time create money. The first are always tired, the second begin to breathe. The third build lives, that outlive them. Daniel thought of his old apartment, the endless chores, the wasted opportunities. He thought of his new routines, his investment in help, his product running while he walked through this ancient city. He wasn't in the third category yet. He knew that, but he was no longer fully in the first either. He was on the bridge between them. This mindset you're learning, the rabbi continued, is not about greed. It is about stewardship. We do not worship money. We do not worship time. We honor what they can become when they serve a purpose beyond comfort. He turned to Daniel again. You asked me once what wealth begins with, he said. Do you remember? Yes. You said it begins with understanding time. Good. So understand this as well. Time is not only what you spend. Time is what you shape. He raised a trembling finger, tapping lightly against Daniel's chest. And as you shape your time reshapes you. A breeze passed through the courtyard, stirring dry leaves along the stones. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, the rabbi stood slowly, leaning on his cane. Come, he said, walk with me. They moved through the narrow streets in companionable silence. The rabbi's pace was slow, but Daniel didn't mind. He noticed how the old man never seemed in a hurry, yet everything about him felt full not of busyness, but of presence. They passed a small shop where a young woman stacked bread on wooden shelves. A man teaching his son how to read Hebrew letters on a worn page. An elderly couple sharing a quiet conversation over coffee. No one looked idle, but no one looked chaste. This is what you're learning to build, the rabbi said at last. Not just money, not just a business, a life that does not chase itself. They reached a small overlook where the city spread out below the mould roofs, new cranes, history and modernity sitting side by side like two people forced to share a table. Daniel took it all in. He thought of who he had been a year ago, a man always drowning in tasks, mistaking exhaustion for importance, spending his life buying things that consumed the very time he longed for. He thought of who he was becoming, a man who used money to buy time, and used time to build something, however modest, that could one day stand on its own, like a tree planted quietly in a forgotten field. He knew he would still stumble, still fear, still hear the voices of people who didn't understand why he outsourced, why he created, why he guarded his hours so fiercely. But now he knew something they didn't. He knew the true cost of a life spent the wrong way. As the sun began to drop, casting golden light across stone and sky, Daniel turned to the rabbi. If you had to put everything you've taught me into one sentence, he asked, One line I could carry with me when you're not here. What would it be? The rabbi looked out over Jerusalem, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Then remember this, he said. The poor trade time for money. The wealthy trade money for time. But the wise, he murmured, make time create what even money cannot buy. Daniel let the words sink deep, carving themselves into the place inside him where decisions are born. Later, on the flight home, he closed his eyes. The product would need work. His systems would need adjusting. His life would keep shifting as he grew. But something inside him was settled. He would no longer live like the king counting coins while his palace burned. He would no longer live like Eliav, rich in possessions, but bankrupt in hours. He would live like the grandson, choosing, as often as he could, to buy time instead of things, and to fill that time with creation, not escape. When the plane touched down, night had fallen over his city. He stepped outside into the cool air and walked slowly toward home, his phone silent in his pocket. He could feel the weight of his old life behind him, and the shape of a new one ahead. At his apartment door, he paused, hand on the key, and smiled to himself as a final thought rose, unbidden but clear. In the end, it was never about how much he owned. It was about what he did with the only wealth he had from the beginning, the quiet, invisible currency of his hours. And somewhere, in an old quarter far away, a rabbi's words echoed softly in his memory, like a blessing that would not fade.